All right. So by now you survived lecture number 5, which is by far the longest lecture. And I do encourage you, once you've done this exercise number 3 here, to go back and look at least some parts of the lecture number 5. I think you will see how the two things tie together so well, and will just very much increase your spatial awareness. So this is exercise number 3. It's on image interpretation, and I think you're going to have a lot of fun with this. So I'm going to talk a lot about remote sensing. So it's been said that a picture is worth 1,000 words. And you and I, when we look at a picture of something, immediately, whether we're aware of it or not, we use our spatial thinking to determine what it is we're looking at. And so there's this whole field of study called remote sensing, in which a scientist uses their spatial thinking ability to interpret images collected typically from above. So from an airplane, from space, from what's calling an unpiloted aerial system, sometimes called a drone these days. Okay. So remote sensing is defined as learning something about an object without being in direct contact with it. Now, we all remote sense, right? We have our eyes. You're actually listening to me right now, so you're using your ears. You're watching the slides, so you're using your eyes, and probably not using your sense of smell right now. But all those are ways of remotely sensing. Okay. And what I do, we use our eyes. We use the electromagnetic spectrum or light to collect imagery from, as I said, airplanes, satellites, and then we deduce the significance of it. We learn something about an object from that. Okay, so the technique of image analysis allows a scientist to create maps of like land cover or vegetation or agricultural crops or forests or wetlands or soils, and look at how those things are changing over time. So it's a very, very powerful tool for monitoring our planet. And we can do that ourselves through spatial thinking, or we can these days program a computer to do some of that for us. Okay. So image interpretation, like you're going to do in this exercise, uses what are called the elements of interpretation to identify the objects of interest. So here are the elements of image interpretation. And what you should note about that is we talked about these in lecture number 5. These are some of the tools that are often used in spatial thinking. So the elements are size, shape, shadow, sight or context, pattern, tone or color, texture, and height. And again, I've shown some examples. There's the pentagon again. All we need to understand about the pentagon is the shape, and we recognize it right away. Okay, we don't need other elements. And so sometimes one element of image interpretation gives you the answer. Other times you need multiple elements to help you out. Okay, and you can see there that that's a nice stand of pine trees, or at least conifer trees. And you can see that they're sort of conically shaped or triangular shaped, kind of pointy at the top. They're not regularly spaced, and so I'm not going to conclude that they're a plantation. Instead, I would call that a natural stand of conifer forest. Okay, so I've looked at the pattern, I've looked at the color, I've looked at the shape. So I've put a bunch of those things together. You could argue that I could look at height and texture as well there. Okay, so that's the idea of these elements of image interpretation. So what we have is a term called the confluence of evidence. And so remote sensing scientists use their spatial thinking ability combined with these elements of interpretation to identify the object and then deduce their significance. And as I kind of mentioned, sometimes we're really positive about what we're identifying, what we're interpreting, like the Pentagon there. And other times there's more uncertainty about what we're looking at. And we call this the concept of confluence of evidence. And confluence of evidence, confluence means a coming together, right? And so a confluence means that we have more than one element. We have multiple elements of interpretation pointing to the same answer. So if we only have one or two, maybe, in most cases, we're not going to be very sure of our answer. Okay, but if we have lots of elements all pointing to the same answer, we feel much better about that. We feel much more certain. Okay? It's like a detective, Sherlock Holmes or somebody, right? The more evidence that you have, the more confident you are. And so this is a process of a combination of deductive and spatial reasoning, just like a detective. Okay? So that's what we're going to do. So with the exercise, you're going to be the image interpreter. So I have 36 images taken from above of different objects, and the goal is for you to interpret them and figure out what it is exactly that you're looking at. And you want to be very, very specific. So as I mentioned in the lecture number 5, when you do this exercise, you want to make sure that you read and look at the examples on the first page of the exercise first. Okay. You got to understand and have that you want a specific answer for each question. A building is not a specific answer. A shopping mall would be a specific answer. So as you look at the different examples on the first page, it helps you understand what I'm talking about and being very, very specific with your answers. Okay. So then there's 36 images to look at. What you want to do is think about those elements of image interpretation. You might want to write them down on a piece of paper or something. And as you look at each of the examples, each of the numbered examples, you want to identify what the highlighted object is. So in some of them, it's pointing to a specific location. If it's not, if it's the whole area, then you're supposed to identify the whole area. And what you want to do is use your spatial thinking abilities along with these elements of image interpretation to answer all 36 questions. Okay? When you're finished, you should check your answers and then try to see if you can understand why your answer wasn't quite right, and make sure you understand why the right answer is the right answer. Okay. It should really increase your spatial awareness. Try to answer all 36 questions. Even if you're guessing, try to think through that. Okay. Again, some are going to be easier than others, and some of you will do better than others. That's okay. The goal here is to increase your spatial thinking awareness. That's why I've given you the answers. So most importantly, make sure you have fun with this. All right. I'll see you for lecture number 6. Thanks and have a good time.